Welcome and thanks for joining us for this panel. Concordia Campus as a Living Lab is the title, whereby panelists will discuss ideas on how research fields may be able to use Concordia's campuses and Montreal as a game changer living lab. Exciting. This event is part of a week-long series, which is coming to an end. This is the last day of the week, which is quite obvious to all, on sustainability and the climate crisis. All events have been brought to you by the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability and the Loyola Sustainability Research Group in collaboration with ForSpace, and it's been really great to collaborate in this way. For those of you joining us for the first time at ForSpace, welcome. We collaborate with our community to make Concordia research initiatives or course activities publicly accessible through interactive experiences such as this one. So as a public space, we encourage open dialogue and discussion, and therefore the decision to run this event as an open meeting as opposed to a webinar was taken with our collaborators to ensure that you benefit from all the ways our distance virtual interaction allows for using your video, audio, and text. Having said that, since we are a large group, we may be subject to interruptions, technical or disruptive behavior. And if such an unfortunate interruption occurs, we'll take immediate action. So in the unlikely event that the call fails, we did have some issues yesterday with connectivity. If it needs shutting down, please be patient and do log back on, and we'll continue where we left off. Okay, on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Jim Grant to further introduce today's session. Over to you, Jim.
Great, thank you, Anna, and to ForSpace for co-hosting this, our 4th annual Sustainability Cross-Disciplines Conference. And of course, it's along with the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability and the Loyola Sustainability Research Institute. I want to acknowledge first that Concordia University is situated on unceded Indigenous land and that Montreal is traditionally known as Tiohtià:ke. Well, as Anna said, this is our final day, and we've got a really exciting event to kick off our final day. I think this event is truly in the spirit of what we're trying to capture, true interdisciplinarity. And we're featuring in our panel today the cluster hires, the city's cluster hires. So you're going to meet some fairly brand new assistant professors who are all brought together as part of this initiative. So in this exciting panel, by my count, we have 3 engineers, a biologist, a philosopher, an artist, and we have a sustainability coordinator as well. So that's a pretty exciting and diverse group. So I'll give a brief introduction to each and then let Ursula take over. So first up will be Dr. Ursula Eicher, Professor of Building, Civil and Environmental Engineering. She's co-director of the Next Generation Cities Institute and a member of the LSRC. She's also a Canada Excellence Research Chair in Smart, Sustainable, Resilient Communities and Cities. Next up will be Dr. Carly Zeter, Assistant Professor in the Department of Biology. She's also a member of the LSRC. Carly's a landscape ecologist focusing on ecosystem services of urban areas. Then there'll be Dr. Mohammed Uf, who's an assistant professor of building, civil and environmental engineering. His research focuses on the optimization of building design. Next will be Dr. Jing Hu, who's an assistant professor of philosophy. Her research attempts to understand the emotional side of morality, including things such as sympathy, empathy, and shame. Dr. Alice Jerry will follow. She's an assistant professor of design and computational arts. Alice is an artist whose research concerns sustainability, aesthetics, and politics. Dr. Chunyan Lai is an assistant professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. Her research develops solutions to make electric vehicles more efficient, compact, and reliable. And Cassandra Lamontagne will jump in at various points in the panel today. She leads the Office of Sustainability at Concordia University. So essentially, she's the go-to person at the university to affect change on campus. And in particular, she leads the Sustainability Action Plan. So back to you, Ursula, to kick this event off.
Okay, thanks, Jim, for that introduction and for moderating so many events, and that you still remember who's where and when. Great job. So yeah, I'm really excited to have this session with all of you this morning. It will be a really interactive session, hopefully, because we want to fill the Sustainability Action Plan with life. and live living labs is pretty closely related. I mean, living labs are exactly this kind of sort of user-centered initiatives where we bring together very diverse actors from students, staff, civil society, whoever we can think of to co-create knowledge, to come up with projects that have a research component, but that also have an engagement component, and that help to support innovation at Concordia. So there are many aspects to a living lab, but I think it clearly distinguishes research that we do in the lab, where we try to control as much the conditions as possible. I mean, that's what engineers love to do, to really control the boundary conditions and make sure that we are as objective as possible in the carrying out of experiments. I think living labs are really different because they deal with humans, they deal with interaction between people. They have obviously also engineering and IT components to it, but they are not controllable because people are still and luckily unpredictable in their behavior. Although there's a lot of discussion, we can have a philosophical discussion of how much we can predict behavior now with all this AI that surrounds us. But I still firmly believe that we can take decisions and that we still have at least a remnant of free will. So it's my little stake to this. But so we want to discuss this morning what we can do in setting up living labs around the Concordia campus, but maybe even a bit further, because all of us here in the so-called city cluster, but now also in the larger Next Generation Cities Institute, we don't just want to work on our own campus, we also want to work on projects in the city, and we're collaborating already with a big team on the C40 competition, which groups the most ambitious cities in the world to really implement sustainability actions in the built environment. So I think each of us here on the panel and many of the listeners are already pretty active in diverse projects around the city. So that is with my introduction, and I came to Concordia 2 years ago. I'm in the Buildings, Civil and Environmental Engineering department because my background is building physics and renewables. But now with the CERC, I look at the broader picture of cities that involves also transportation, waste management, water management, everything in the city that contributes to carbon emissions. And Concordia campus is actually quite a significant energy consumer. We might maybe go into that a bit later. And I think there's still a lot of options to reduce our consumption and thus our carbon footprint. But we will come to these more concrete ideas of what we might do and in which domain we might do things in a second round. To start off, kick off that conversation, we saw that it would be good that each of the cluster hires, which, as Jim said, come from very different backgrounds, very different perspectives on the city, and probably also on our campus, gives an insight of what they think, what is a living lab, and what would that mean in the Concordia context. And then we enter a more open discussion after we see how our ideas on living lab projects relate to the Concordia Sustainability Action Plan that will be presented by Cassandra. So let's do a first round on first ideas of what you think is a living lab, and what does it mean in your research work. So to start off, we have Kali Seiter from biology.
Thanks, Ursula. Okay, so I'll start off first. No slides. I'm just going to share what the concept of a living lab really means to me as a biologist, as a scientist, and then I think we'll circle back around and I'll share an example of a project that I've been involved in recently. And to me, using our campus as a living lab specifically really means giving our Concordia students opportunities to put into practice, into action, the concepts that they're learning in the classroom. So it's really a chance to actually bridge that, what we sometimes call like the knowledge application gap or the no-do gap, where they can do that in a supportive environment, right? On our own campus, collaborating with our colleagues, with our faculty, with our staff. And it's not necessarily about outcomes to me. I mean, it's great if we get positive outcomes from this process, but it's also about giving students the chance to really explore an idea and to make mistakes and to learn from them on our campus environment. And then moving beyond that, so that's really thinking about pedagogy and about how as a teacher I can incorporate living lab concepts. But I think as Ursula was mentioning, the living lab concept really means engaging the broader community in the research process as well. So a chance to allow, stakeholders, rights holders, users, beneficiaries of our work, the opportunity to really understand how academic work happens, in my case, how scientific research happens. And I think that can really span a broad range of approaches from, you know, demonstration projects or installations on our campus to make our work more visible to those outside the university, all the way through to real co-production of research with the community, building research questions with the community to answer together as Concordians. And so I will keep this part very short because I know I'm going to go over my time later, and I'll pass this on to the next person on our list.
All right, so thanks, Kali. The next person on our list is Mohammed Uf from the same department as myself, building civil environmental engineering.
Right, great. Well, thank you, Ursula, for the introduction. So yeah, for my definition of a living lab, I actually put a couple of slides just to show sort of what I was thinking about this concept. I was doing a bit of, just a second, let me double check if I'm sharing the right screen. Yes. I was just spending a little bit of time trying to look up or just research what the concept of a living lab is. And I came across a lot of definitions. One that I thought was interesting was, talking about a space for participative research and development, as well as activity deployment using multidisciplinary methods. And with that sense, I, sort of also came across a couple of other elements of different definitions, talking about the concept of collaboration between researchers and end users, providing a feedback loop to users that like the normal end users of a research activity, let's say, or the potential end users for a research goal, just including those from the beginning into the research process. Looking at, at it as a test bed for developing or testing applications that are developed to users. Again, as an engineer or building scientist, we talk a lot about building technologies and control strategies, like things to make buildings more efficient, but it's a place where really we can test how these work in a real life scenario. And that's one of the main elements that I also saw. And overall, I think the one concept that I got out of all of these different definitions, again, coming across several articles around the literature, is that the idea of having users as not being part of, or not being an object of research that we're just observing, but as part of a participative process or key actors in this innovation process. I even was playing around, did a bit of text mining work on some of those definitions that I came across. And again, the keywords that would pop up are about users, having them as part of the research, and the co-creation and collaboration process with that. And just taking this and thinking about my research on buildings and buildings energy efficiency in general, there's one of the quotes that I saw in the literature a while ago that kind of brought me into this whole research area of looking at occupant building interactions, was this quote of, buildings don't use energy, but it's actually people that do. Or in other words, according to those definitions of living labs, it's really the users that do in this case. And this is why the concept of using a living lab, and I'll talk about some examples of work that we've been doing and things that we're also developing or in the process of development at Concordia, maybe in the next round. But there's a couple of elements to that, or like to how include users in this case in a building living lab, or the campus as a living lab, and that could be applicable to Concordia campus or other buildings that we're also working with in Montreal, outside in some other provinces, with how to use the existing buildings almost as is, but sort of as a place for collecting data and participating or involving users into the research process of building energy efficiency in general. So I'll try to stop it here as well, just so that I can maybe spend a little more time in the next round in explaining some of the concrete examples of what that means from a building science perspective. So I'll pass it on to the next person, and thanks again.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. Maybe just a little comment directly on this. I mean, when we looked at Concordia's building energy consumption in COVID times, actually, there was nobody there. I mean, last year, the first lockdown, the consumption was surprisingly high still. So sometimes I have the impression buildings do also use energy, even if there are no people inside. So that may be something we could discuss later.
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss it. Yeah.
Okay, but we're still in the definition phase of living labs, and we are very lucky to have a philosopher amongst us, and philosophers are known to know what they how to define things properly, and not just in this sort of intuitive ways that engineers often do it. So the word is now with Jing Iris Hu to give us her perspective on living labs.
Thank you, Ursula. So as the only philosopher here, my idea, so I'll first starting with one anecdote, which is that when I was in grad school, I was hanging out with a lot of science friends, and one day they asked me, are you guys going to the lab? So as a philosopher, I thought, what lab? And then we had a joke about it, because it's funny for philosophers, because it's interesting to think about what is our lab, right? So I told them, so instantly I told them, no, we don't go to labs. We don't have labs in our department. There's no labs. But I think if I were asked today, I will say, no, yeah, there is a lab. We can use the world or the living campus as a lab. So to me, the idea of having the living campus as a lab, it means a more engaging process for the students to be aware and self-reflect of their own behavior and thinking process. So one part that's really exciting is to have not only philosophy students, but also students with various background, to have them be engaged in the process of reflectively thinking about our shared experience and shared emotions. And I'm sure the topic of shared experience and shared emotions is very important, especially in current time, even though sometimes we do not have a lot of channel and a lot of time to discuss them and to talk about them. So in my experience and in my teaching, I find it really helpful for the students to engage in their own, because the topic that I'm interested in is in interpersonal relationship and the relationship between self and the community. So I think one of the most important community that they are involved in is their life on campus, even though nowadays we might have a slightly different idea of what their community is physically, or maybe that's virtually online. So I think the first, so I think for me, the most important idea is to have the students at the same time be their own agents and also be reflective of their own experience. So that's basically what I think is important for philosopher and philosophy students in the campus as a living lab. I'll circle back to my examples later.
Okay, great. Thanks. I mean, that sounds nearly like a mass invasion question. Is there life on campus? That's what, yeah, we all wonder in these times. And hopefully we get back to some life on campus pretty soon. All right, so now we go to the design part of our city cluster. And we have Alice Jerry with us, who works on interesting and strange combinations of design, waste, and other fascinating topics in the city. So, Alice.
Alice, we can't hear you.
Whoops, sorry about that. Thank you, Ursula. I took a different approach from my colleagues here. I will just showcase a few international examples, and then in the second round, move into more concrete examples linked to the campus and a current research project, interdisciplinary research project. I realized the difficulty of outlining from my perspective, design and expertise materials, clear definitions. So I just want to show examples that exemplify the ethos of living labs, but that not necessarily label are not necessarily labeled living lab as such. So first
would
example.
you like to go full screen on your?
Oh, I'm not?
No.
Oh, sorry about that. I will just share screen again. Or stop sharing. Oh, if I share the desktop, I think it's going to be better. Can you see full screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great, perfect. So first example, Atelier Luma, situated in France, cross-disciplinary endeavor that builds on local resources, materials, talent, and local community. Luma is a think tank, production workshop, and learning network that leverages the know-how of a city and a bioregion to inform collaborative practice, develop new circular economy practices, and develop new projects with experts and the community. For example, one of their projects focuses on the transformation of biomatter of the region, sunflower, explore the potential of this waste to create new application and prototypes with citizens, with the community, with experts to create new production, new sustainable production systems. Collaborative Kitchen is also one of their project. Ask the question, how can we learn from the local talents and build a new food community? So this is a participatory project at the crossroad of biology, design, community, students that looks at the power of food and food making to create new social bonds and local economic expertise. And finally, another example I want to discuss is La Fabrique du Clos, also situated in France. So the main objective is to forge social bonds between citizens, local structures. Their project integrates future users of sites through actions, training projects, awareness, and collaboration with local associations. So basically, Bella Stock experiments with companies. They seek to improve, innovate, and validate implementation techniques with demolition construction byproduct. So they follow urban demolition processes and bring their expertise to reuse the materials in the development of new public spaces. So I think that the principles that I want to highlight across those two initiatives are basically the sharing of expertise between different stakeholders and the importance of creating bonds between students, experts, communities, and different sites and spaces in and out of campus.
All right. Thank you, Alice. And finally, the last of our cluster hires is Chunyan Lai. She's in electrical engineering and probably has quite a different perspective on living labs, and that makes this whole setup so interesting, that we come from so different backgrounds. Alice, you should stop sharing your emails. Okay, so Chunyan, could you give us your view?
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think I'm going to share my, oh, what is this?
Yeah,
Okay.
I see it.
Okay. So as Ursula introduced, me, myself as an electrical engineer, I look at the electrification of like different parts. So when I look at the topic of like campus as a living lab, I think about a lab. Like so right now we really most of our research relying on the experimental tests like in the view lab. So in this smart cities topic, so we do need a much larger lab such as a campus, because a campus is also kind of a large community and it can be viewed as like a small city. So most of the research topics that we need to experiment on such a facility or infrastructure that really located inside the campus. So in my opinion, like for like the campus as a living lab topic, I can think about it in 3 different aspects. Like one is like to utilize what we already have on campus, like the infrastructure and facility, to collect the data to learn about what is the current situation. And then the second one is that we wanted to innovate, or integrate our research results or some new design or components into our current campus. And then so that it can be used to by our all members of Concordia, right? So for electrification of transport, my research based on the electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. So electric vehicle design, so we do collaborate with the automotive manufacturers to develop more efficient and reliable electric vehicles. Can we bring in such electric vehicles on campus to for certain testing or gathering data to proven that it's really more efficient and more reliable? So those things that that's I can think about. And the other aspect, like as the EV penetration goes high, so we know the EV market, let me see. Yeah, so as the electric vehicle market keep growing and increasing, and by 2019, the EV sales already reached like 7.2 million electric vehicles. So as this number increase, like the electricity demand to our power grid, it's a kind of a huge issue. So we can see there are electric vehicle charging stations near campus. If we can turn all our campus parking lots or like the parking space with this such the charging facility, how would this the increased energy demand impact our campus facility and infrastructure? So those are there's a lot of problems that we wanted to look at as in the next generation cities. So these can be investigated or can be incorporated in our current campus facility or infrastructure. So these part will be the most interest to me. So as the living lab in the campus. And I think that's what I wanted to share at this part.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, everybody, for that first round. I mean, we are open to discussion, of course, so that's why we changed the format into a normal Zoom call and not just a webinar. So whenever somebody from the audience wants to say something, you can put a question in the chat, but you can also raise your hand and I will look at the participant list and hopefully notice when somebody raised their hands to allow you the opportunity to speak. So you feel free to intervene at any point in time. But so far we have mainly been talking about definitions, what we understand under a living lab, and we learned that a lab is not maybe something philosophers think about as such, but I mean, in the end, everything is a lab. So we are all part of a big experiment, hopefully in control of the experiment. But I think we now want to become a bit more concrete. Let's see, I've got question in the chat already. Yeah, okay, very good. So there's a question on how this fits into the actual campus facilities, and that's exactly what we wanted to do. This was still very general, but now we want to become more concrete and see what each of us thinks about living activities, and then we also hear from Cassandra of what the university has already agreed to do as an action plan, and of course everything that involves action on campus can maybe be turned into a living lab. So that's something we're going to talk about and trying to make it more concrete now. So I would say let's just do the second round and hear a bit more concretely what people think can be done on campus, and then we discuss that and try to prioritize what is most important. Yeah. So Kali, go.
Okay, I am going to share my screen here. Are you? Let me start this.
Yes.
Okay.
Seeing it.
You're seeing my screen, not my presenter view?
It's now full screen, yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So we are really fortunate at right here. This is Loyola campus. That's where I'm based in biology, but at Concordia campus in general, to have access to a pretty incredible green space. We actually have much more green space on our campuses than many other places in our neighborhoods. And I think we often have this tendency to see green space as empty, like it's something that's just going to be filled with buildings later. And I really want to encourage you to think of this as space that actually is not empty. It has its own infrastructure, or potentially has its own infrastructure. It's just ecological infrastructure. So some examples from campus already. We have the City Farm School, which has been running for a long time on Loyola's campus. Here we have Andrea Tremblay's Mind, Heart, Mouth Garden that works with the community. We have a number of new trees. So there's 2 of my wonderful graduate students planting a tree on campus. And I think as a university with a strong sustainability mandate, Concordia can and really should be a leader in showing how we can manage and steward our green spaces to conserve biodiversity to benefit our communities. So to me, as a biologist, our campus provides a great outdoor classroom, outdoor platform for a living lab approach. We do have green spaces downtown. I haven't showed them today, but I'm happy to talk about those in the discussion. And so I'm going to talk about a classroom project today that I was fortunate to collaborate with Cassandra Lamontagne and others in the sustainability office and facilities this past fall to try and bring some living lab elements into my urban ecology classroom. So this was a new class in biology, about 60 students, which for us is pretty small. And in class, I teach a lot about the value of small scale habitats, the importance of managing our green space for biodiversity, for well-being. And so to put that knowledge into action, instead of writing a final exam, these students worked together in groups to propose ecological landscaping projects for our campus. So essentially creating gardens that would enhance the surrounding environments for people, but also for other life in these ecosystems. And this was a pretty big ask. It was a kind of final project for the course. And so they had to consider all of the urban ecology, theory and principles we learned in the classroom. Think about different levels of biodiversity, different ecosystem services. They had to consider sustainability criteria. So these were criteria designed by Cassandra and the Sustainability Office on the type of plants, alignment with the action plan, opportunities for Concordians to learn. And they had to think about management, really practical criteria designed by Faisal, Shanib, and facilities management on, maintenance and local purchasing and budgets, and put this all together. This was a new endeavor, so we really weren't sure how this was going to turn out. And the students were absolutely amazing. So I was really blown away by these projects. I'm just showing a few kind of snapshots from some of their designs here, but I wish I had time to show you their video presentations because they were absolutely, smart and creative and well-researched. And so they put these pitches together. And our next step is to try and take this from a classroom project to a reality. And so I'm working on this now with Cassandra and Faisal and others, and we have secured funding from the World Wildlife Foundation for one garden at Loyola through their Go Wild Campus program that will be inspired by these projects. We're not necessarily going to take one whole project and implement it. We're working to pull ideas from these different designs. And we're starting to work with David Cruz, who manages our campus landscapes downtown, for a potential second garden that would be probably near the entrance of Grey Nuns. I'm a little hesitant to announce things and then have people say, hey, we didn't approve that. So I'll just note here that we are still working with all of the relevant kind of campus stakeholders and people to do this. If you feel like you are one of those stakeholders and you have not heard about this project, my email is here, or you can find Cassandra. But we are really working to actively bring one or two of these projects to life this spring and summer. And if you're a student that is keen to get involved, or if you're like, hey, that's my project you just showed on that slide, I haven't forgotten about you. Please keep your eye out for more news and a call for volunteers as we move towards spring. So this is something that will continue to kind of involve the campus community. And I'm probably over my 3 minutes here that I was supposed to talk, but I'm going to end with a couple of just challenges that I really hope we can address in the discussion that are things that really I thought a lot about in doing this project. And the first one, and maybe Cassandra will help guide this discussion later, is how do we better streamline this process of working with students, faculty, various staff, campus offices? I mean, I'm working with the green spaces of campus, but I'm sure my colleagues working, on buildings are having similar issues where it's finding who do I contact, who was missed, which office has to give an approval, what is the kind of action plan for putting these into work, knowing that we are all really, really busy. And then the second question that I have is really how do we take this living lab concept off campus and into the community? And so to me, it's a little bit more obvious how I implement a project in my classroom in the context of Concordia's campus. But if I want to really do a living lab that's incorporating community members, that's maybe bringing in outside stakeholders, are there methods that we can do that through campus? Are there ways to pair our students with local groups or bring people into this process? So I would love to address both of those after we've kind of heard some other examples here.
All right. Great. Thanks, Carly. I'm just trying, sorry, I have some issues here. There's a direct question to what you said from Matt Leddy. Do you maybe just want to ask your question directly in person so that we see some faces from the audience, and maybe introduce yourself briefly that we can be a bit more interactive? Matt, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm the Zero Waste Coordinator for Zero Waste Concordia, and I used to work at Loyola College. And just want to say they're doing wonderful this whole week. Every webinar I've been to is just filled. So, that's amazing. It's good to see. I guess I was wondering, how do you balance, wanting to preserve biodiversity with the idea that an empty space is looked at as a place for a building and revenue and whatnot? How do you balance those differing values? How do you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Very good question. And that is hard, right? Because campus will have new buildings in the future. As much as I would like to keep all of our green spaces green, that's probably not realistic. And so I think there are two things here. There are three things. So one is kind of working with the full set of stakeholders to understand, which spaces to use and not to use. And so for this particular class project, we talked to David Cruz, we talked to Jerry on Loyola campus, we talked to a number of people. I say we, mostly Faisal did a lot of this legwork, so thank you, Faisal. And we came up with a set of places that might be good candidates for the students to work with. So we weren't saying design a garden anywhere. So constraining what you're doing. But I think in the broader picture of what you're saying, we need to work on a kind of a campus master plan, which is actually in the works right now. And I saw there was a question from Rocio there in the chat, so she is here. that there are people working now on putting together more of a master plan for campus that will hopefully involve these discussions with the community to show, which are the places that we are planning to put buildings, which are the places that we can use for other projects, so that we're all kind of working with the same set of information. And I think a lot of this can be done in relatively small spaces, right? So even where there is a building, there's still space around them. There's still space where instead of like having that little patch of grass, you could have a patch of native plants for pollinators, or there are planter boxes. There are areas along footpaths where we're not going to put a building because that space is too small. So it's about thinking about optimizing the non-built space that we know will stay non-built, and then kind of working together as a community to prioritize, where should we have new buildings and where should we maybe say, hey, let's leave that space. Because this isn't just space for biodiversity, it's space for students, right? To, sit and eat lunch and, talk with their colleagues and walk between classes. And so they do use that space as well.
It seems like part of it as well would be just, even if they go ahead with the building, just the idea that you were heard, you had a place to have that conversation and just hear each other out. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think communication among all the different people on campus is really important here.
Thank you.
Okay, great, Kali. I mean, and really good questions about the processes and how to streamline them and take it to the community. I'm sure we get back to that. But let's go to the next presenter. Mohammed, what do you see as good living labs from the building's perspective?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna pick up where I left off here, and just also respond to the comment that was raised earlier, because my next slide on this slide deck was actually going to talk about how it's really the building systems at the end that do use energy, and there's a level of energy use that you need to have in order to maintain the building. However, that being said, we do see, and responding just specifically to the COVID-19 question, where we didn't see a huge drop in energy use, even though there's no people in the building, and it's mostly operator decisions. So we actually started a new line of research on user operators interactions with systems, and thinking of operators as a super user in a sense, where their impact on building energy consumption and building use is quite significant. But generally speaking, even at the occupant level, there's a lot of research that has supported the fact that the behavior and the interaction between buildings and their occupants can actually increase, or in some cases have a difference in energy consumption between very similar buildings that could be in 2 to 3 or 4 times the energy use of a very similar building that had similar systems and everything. It's just about how it's being used that makes the big difference, beyond obviously the baseline of maintaining it. So thinking of Concordia's facilities as one of the potential ideas for living labs, the one good thing about Concordia's, or the one fortunate part about this, is that we do have a very centralized building management system for most of our large buildings on campus, and that's whether it's in downtown or in Loyola. And the idea is that when I look at those buildings, they are on their own part of a living lab. In the definitions that I came across, and one of the ones that also stuck with me in terms of what relates to my research, is that the living lab is also a platform to foster real-time data collection, and for my specific purposes on user building interactions or user interactions with building systems. So the good thing is that we can take a look at a floor plan, let's say, of any of those buildings, and dig into any of the systems. We have already those systems existing that can tell you what exactly goes on in the ceiling and inside the building. You have all the data that's being logged from all the different points and sensors, and these are in the magnitudes of thousands of points across all of our buildings. And just as an example, I picked yesterday from the GMSB building, looking at the temperature profile, for example, in one of the rooms, and just looking at how it changes over every 5 minutes. And you have all of this data available from a lot of our buildings that at the end of the day is only used to just make sure that there's nothing completely wrong with our buildings, like just as triggering alarms. But there's a lot of potential, or it becomes really almost a gold mine for research on building and user interactions, as well as operator interactions with building. So what we do with this data is, first of all, better understand and model user interactions with building systems. So these are some examples from the data we've been working with, where you can look at all of these variables. And again, I just showed the temperature before, but there's a lot of other sensor points and variables that we can measure. And here we're trying to see the profiles of temperature indoor and outdoor, and when people open windows, when they adjust or decrease a thermostat set point. And with a lot of this information, we're trying to sort of predict for the different preferences of different people that occupy these offices. So trying to get that understanding is one of the first steps. And then one of the next steps is, how do we use this information to do something better, to optimize the operation of the building so that it is more representative or more responsive to the preferences and needs of different people that, you know, in every office, essentially you have a different preference. So in one example here, we're trying to look at using this data with some form of quadratic deviation of set points, while understanding the preferences of different occupants. How much can we change the set points? And changing a set point of temperature, as an example, in like parts of our building, can actually translate into thousands of dollars in savings. And you know, that also translates into energy consumption, or energy efficiency, or energy consumption savings, as well as carbon dioxide emissions, and like all of it rolls out that way. But the thing is that we operate everything as if just a monotonous type of building. We didn't even change anything, or not anything significant, with the fact that the buildings are nearly empty, just because, you know, things were kept on schedule. So that was one of the points. Another point was this is another research project. I'm just, again, trying to get some snapshots of those, where we're trying to look at a way for interacting with the users by changing how these set points and how the temperature changes. So what we're trying to do here is, let's say we see an occupant that opened the window in the month of February, where you don't really want to see a lot of window opening, but just because the indoor temperature increased a little bit, they ended up opening the window here. What we're trying to do is actually decrease the temperature in the room at the same time when we observe this, so that we're making them a bit colder than, you know, like instead of just heating up because they opened the window and trying to heat up more, and which essentially translates into a lot of energy waste. We're going to get it to the cold temperature that, you know, you would have expect from an open window, and that will trigger you to close it again because it's not favorable at this time. And we've been trying to experiment with doing the same way when it's actually the other way around, where it's advantageous to open the window because the weather outside is pretty good. You can save on our cooling energy demand in order to actually use natural ventilation in that sense. So a lot of this work has been done mostly on simulation platforms. So the idea is, you know, we're still missing, or have been missing, the deployment or test bed / implementation aspect of that, because with a lot of reasons, obviously from facilities, we don't really have the access. We can read all of this information. We have tons of data that we can get from all our buildings, but there's a bit of reluctance, and it's understandable, to try to change things in all our buildings, you know, just for testing or research, because that will need more, you know, interact, or at least telling people that, you know, I can just like go to your office and change things without letting you know. So that's where the living lab aspects can come up. And luckily, we've been working on this project for a while now. That's pretty much almost at completion with the Hall Building Living Lab. It's a renovation project of the 10th floor, where we've isolated about 190 square meters of offices, about 4 offices in total, where we'll be still collecting all that data that we can collect from anywhere else in the building. But the main objective here is to try to experiment and test with these smart control strategies. So this is a rendering of the space. We're actually going to go and site visit in the next couple of weeks or so to try to see where the progress is, but it's almost ready. That's the good part. And the main advantage of this living lab is that we would have direct access to configure and play around with the room controls, like try to do those things that we've been simulating on how to trigger people to do certain stuff, or to change, you know, set points and operations based on preferences. And with the fact that it also has a lot more instrumentalization than the typical offices or the typical buildings that we have here, we're going to be collecting data on specific meters for every circuit, essentially, in those offices, every temperature setting, you know, before and after a tree heats within the mechanical system. I'm not going to have time to go into all the details, but it's really hopefully going to have a lot of impact, and it is almost going to be ready for occupancy pretty soon. So once we're opening the campus slowly, that would be a great place to start to test with these experiments, or at least research ideas in reality. And overall, like, the ideas that we're trying to develop, or one of the main research directions that I'm taking is on those occupant-centric control algorithms that are essentially doing this explanation, or this idea of what we're doing. And this is in line with a lot of international initiatives as well that we've been involved in with the International Energy Agency Annex on occupant-centric building design and operation, where we're taking a lot of this information and hopefully would have a living lab on campus where we're actually going to be able to test all of this work. So I'll leave it up here for now to just, again, give an overview of what we define as a living lab, let's say, for a building, from a building engineering perspective for our campus, and be happy to take any questions if there are. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mohammed. I mean, yeah, very interesting, very concrete. And I mean, I think there's this aspect of assessing comfort conditions. So it would be nice to have much more feedback from the users of how they feel about the conditions in certain spaces. So I think there I could see an interaction with the users, but also, I mean, what Carly mentioned about the processes. I mean, if we see there's a lot of energy consumption, even if nobody's in the building, there's also maybe the potential of saving lots of money. And I think people and students would probably be very motivated to find out where this consumption is wasted. And so this kind of more detective role of involving users of finding out what is really happening in the building and does it need to be the way it is, could be an interesting point. And finally, maybe to relate to the others, I mean, this definition of comfort could be maybe enlarged a bit. I mean, comfort, I mean, if you talk about it, you think about it in terms of thermal comfort, of you feel warm or cold. But I mean, I guess, I mean, the relation to Carly's work with the green space, I mean, there's this sort of well-being, a much broader sense of comfort, how you feel in a space. Probably has to do with, I see you sitting in an office that doesn't have a window, I guess, and that's where you are. So I wouldn't feel very comfortable in this. So, and seeing green would probably improve your conditions. So I think this discussion about comfort and what that really means in your life on campus could be also a really interesting point of connection
yeah,
right.
I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to continue the discussion on that, especially on the comfort side. I think, and even on the understanding of behavior, we're doing it from a very technical, let's say, data perspective. But I think there's more to this than what we do. So definitely a lot of room for that, and also, like looking at the operations and this idea. I like this whole idea of the operator as a super user. Like, the decision that you make as an operator is probably 100 times more impactful than me adjusting my thermostat. So yeah, I think it would be great to take that on there. So again, be happy to continue the discussion and maybe move on. I don't know if there's any questions, or just move on to the next.
Yeah, let's finish the first round of more concrete living lab ideas. So Jing, I mean, if you can become concrete, I mean, I don't know how a philosopher becomes concrete. So we maybe hear from you the second statement. You're still muted.
I think you're muted.
Jing, are you talking? Are you?
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think you missed anything too important. What I said was I will start sharing my screen. So, all right. So is it on now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Ursula. So I will talk a little bit about shared emotions on a living lab, on a living campus. So, sorry. So there are a number of emotions that I'm particularly interested in, and I think we can observe these emotions on a number of social settings, which campus and campus living is a very important venue. So one of the example that I'm going to give is shame, which is a very unwelcome emotion, right? But there are a lot of people argue that shame can at least at the same time being a reflective emotion. It's about one's standing in the community. So it's about an individual, not only how the individual sees herself, but also how the individual thinks she's being perceived in the community. So there is this idea of internalized others, meaning that not only we do live amongst other people, but also we internalize others. We reserve certain space for others to live in within our moral sake. Right? So when I want to look at our relationship, our individual's relationship with the community, there are different models. One is a more individualistic model, individualistic self, and the other is the more relational or communitarian idea of self. So I'll go into that. So this is the illustration, not very accurate, but of the individualistic self, right? The idea is that the little Smurf, the red one on the left, is thinking, making the assumption that he is the individual, is the concrete individual. And he thinks about how he is being perceived and talked about and gossiped about by all the other Smurfs, right? So this is the individualistic idea of individual. When it's coupled with shame, which is that when an individual experiences shame, he or she is thinking about how they are being perceived by a community that they are kind of a part of, but not a very important part of, right? So the community is not part of their identity. And then the second model, which is here, which is the green Smurf, which perceives himself as part of the Smurf community. So what that does is that when they do experience a mild sense of shame, it is some kind of a reminder to remind themselves of their standing in the community they are in. So if they did something that's unwelcome, that's regarded as, inappropriate, a sense of shame would arise that hint them that they should revise or change their own behavior. And of course, here I'm talking about very, very mild cases of shame. I'm not talking about like very drastic cases of shame, which requires which requires our attention as well. So I want to highlight these two different models, which essentially the difference is that in the first model, others' feedback is reviewed as threat to our own sovereignty, right? Thinking of our own moral domain is like our own kingdom, that I am the only person that's responsible for it. And then the second model is the idea that thinking a person is a part of a community, therefore the negative feedbacks are viewed as just negative input. And then this is a relationship between individual and the community that need to be constantly regulated and constantly regulated and managed. So I want to, obviously we can see here the second model is it's a whole lot better in helping us establish our own moral identity and as well as to mediate ourselves in the relationship with the community. So my point here is that with this project is to show that the hidden assumption about our relationship with our community and our own moral life with the moral life of the communities is a very important. It's very important in helping us to see the shared emotions, for example, anger, compassion, and shame, and this hidden assumptions might need to be questioned from time to time. So that is my concrete example.
All right, thank you, Jing, for this. So I guess there's a lot of discussion going on in the chat on BioBlitz and community, and they all think in this sort of communicative way. It could probably lead to great results. So, but before we go into more details, we first have Alice still to hear on more concrete examples and Chunyang.
Yes, well, okay, so I won't share my screen, so I won't share my emails. So I just want to highlight maybe a few initiatives that we're working in the fine arts. So, well, I'm from the design department, and the design department has a long history of working with sustainable materials and also working across communities. And I think that there's most specifically with the new sustainability action plan, there is an incredible opportunity to work at the crossroad of repurposing, transforming material waste, food, and bio-inspired processes, whether looking at sites, spaces, material repurposing, and looking at the circularity of the campus. So just to, maybe some of you are not aware of that, but across the Faculty of Fine Arts, we have a committee that's called Sustainability of Fine Arts Committee that I chair with, and which is a cross-faculty committee composed of professors, staff, students, and we're currently developing the CARE Guide, which is a best practice material sustainability, I would say, guidelines. And basically we're creating a cross-faculty survey to assess needs. So we spoke earlier about users and the importance of users. So I think one key aspect is to look at, okay, what are the users of the EV building? Carly has the chance to work on a green campus. The EV is a rather gray infrastructure. So basically the CARE Guide also looks at the sustainable aspect, but from a material perspective. So this is one thing we're working on across different departments, but inside the EV building. So we're looking at ways to improve material practices within the EV. Other than that, I'd like to also highlight the work that's being done by many students and prof initiatives within fine arts, especially in milieu, which is repurposing of waste, be it food, biocompost, bio-inspired. So I think there are incredible opportunities like on that aspect. So I see many ways of looking at how to collaborate with, say, facilities. We have the chance of having Fazal here, who might want to jump in the conversation, but also working with different researchers in textile and looking at the spaces around campus and inside campus and how we can look at the circularity of our consumption process, whether it's food, restaurants. We only have the Vanut right now. What else can we build? How can we collaborate with those stakeholders? How can we repurpose their waste to create new objects, to create new furniture, to redesign the campus, or even think about outside, because like say in the EV building, we have the Mackay Alley, which is like a great alley. How can we transform that using repurposed materials, creating new collaborations with soccer? And I think that all this has the potential of becoming mini seed project involving community partners, students, profs, facilities. So to me, these are very concrete examples that can be implemented. Well, short term, long term. Yeah.
All right, thanks. I mean, I'm sure we come back to the waste topic and reuse. But maybe let's finish that second round with Chunyang giving her ideas on concrete living lab projects, let's say. Although you mentioned already some, but maybe you want to have the second round. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
As I mentioned previously, so I look at like the electric vehicle technology. Like right now, one of my main research focus is on the electric vehicle components, how to make them more efficient and reliable. And as I know, people are saying, okay, Quebec maybe is not a good place for electric vehicles, but in another aspect that we think that Quebec is a very good place for electric vehicles because we use 95 or 98% of the clean energy. So we can expand our electric vehicle market by reduce the greenhouse gas emission. So this is a very important aspect. But the other, why we said maybe electric vehicle is not good in Quebec, because we have pretty cold temperature and the EVs are less efficient in this very cold temperature, especially the batteries. And so in this regard, so we wanted to look at maybe from the user feedback, how does those EV performs at different temperature level, and also what are the problems in these various components inside the electric vehicle. So how can we make them more efficient and reliable? So regarding the efficiency issues, that we are using some new technology to develop these electric vehicle powertrain components, which is the main energy consumption parts from the electric vehicle battery packs to their electric motors. So, and within that, we have the power electronics components. So we are developing new technology on this aspect. But regarding the reliability issues, so the EV, they're not new, but still they going to large amount into the market is still relatively new. So we wanted to look at what other problems the EV end users are facing. So how can we make them more reliable? So on Concordia University as a small community, can we gather such problems and for our research? I think this could be one important aspect. So right now, we are looking at these problems to enhance the reliability of the electric vehicles. But we would like to gather more information from our campus community about their electric vehicle problems or some failure, and also maybe the performance under different environment conditions, like the weather or the temperature. So that's sort of data. And the second problem that we are facing is about the increased energy demand for electric vehicle charging, and also the impact from this electric vehicle charging on the utility grid. So for this aspect, we are also looking at different charging technologies. So if we could apply such charging technologies on campus, for example, we could build our charging stations with our research results, and that could be one. The other, we would like to gather some driving cycle data that surrounding in the campus, the surrounding area in the of the campus, right? So we know for different driving cycles, like for example, highway or within the city, so the vehicle have different performance and especially the efficiency. So the electric vehicles are much more efficient within the cities because they can recycle the energy during the start and stop. But on highway, the electric motors are less efficient for the highway driving. So this is kind of opposite of the conventional combustion engine vehicles. So we would like to also gather such data for this, even Montreal driving cycles, or the Concordian driving cycles within the community. So how do these different driving conditions affect our electric vehicle energy consumption, the efficiency especially? And also we do investigate different driver behaviors, like how do they impact the vehicle consumption of the vehicle. So this aspect, this kind of data, we can use them for our charging station localization. How do we plan our charging stations within the campus, and then based on this kind of data. And the last thing is that to address the increased energy consumption from electric vehicles, we need to incorporate more renewable energy sources and also study how these charging behavior impacts the distribution network or the transformers, and also how do we build this local energy network more efficiently based on our current infrastructure. So these are the things that I wanted to get touching, but right now I don't have a very solid project on such topics yet. As Kali mentioned, that we do have those questions like how, who to contact and how do we start such projects on campus. So that's all about my research ideas and the topics that I would like to consider for this campus as a living lab. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chunyang. Yeah, I think it's pretty apparent that we need this master plan for the campus, and you see also with the challenge of these sort of multiple scales that we're dealing with. I mean, from the sort of details of electronic components in a motor drive up to the big picture of the building performance. So it's a real multi-scale, pretty complex problem, and I think these are good ideas to start talking of more than long-term strategic plan of diverse projects and how they interrelate on the campus. Before going to the action plan, I mean, there's two ideas in the chat which are interesting. A lot of discussion about the so-called BioBlitz. Sounds pretty dangerous, but and then also something on thermal comfort. So maybe Emma, you mentioned the BioBlitz. Can you maybe explain shortly what that is, that we don't lose that idea? Are you in the call, and could you just comment on this? I didn't check whether she's still in the call, but Emma Displant, are you there?
I don't see her here right now. But
all right, so then
I can mention what a BioBlitz is, or Rebecca Titler could speak on that as well.
Whatever, go ahead, Kali.
Sure, so I can start and Rebecca can also comment on this. So a BioBlitz, the basic idea of a BioBlitz, it's kind of an education-based, nature activity where you choose a site. So sometimes, people will do this in a park, like Mont Royal does them often, or sometimes, where everyone goes out and tries to kind of record as many species as they can find. And so you can do this using apps like iNaturalist. There's lots of different ways to do it. But the basic idea is that you have people going out and recording, all the biodiversity that you can find in an area. And as just a small example of what you can find with these, there's a kind of community-led park called the Champ de Passib in Mile End that some of you might know of or might have kind of walked through. That's a kind of wild space in the city, and they do an annual BioBlitz, and they've found over 450 species in this very small green space in the city. And so some of the ideas bouncing around in the chat are this would be a fun thing to do with students to get them out and noticing the nature that's around us. Potentially, with some more effort, you could even structure it in a way that we got better data for monitoring. And so you could say, you go to this spot and look for this amount of time, or look for these certain species. And then you build up this list over time of, okay, we found this many. Let's say you started with something simple. You said, we're going to look for butterflies. And you say, okay, we found this many butterfly species on our campus. You go back the next year, the next year, the next year, and you see, is this changing? Is it increasing as we manage our green space differently? Are we losing species as we change our campus? And so it's a way, depending how you do it, it's either kind of an educational tool, or it can become a research citizen science tool to monitor.
No, great. I mean, I think it's part of the mapping exercise also. I mean, we want to map the energy consumption, the status of our biodiversity, and then come up with transformation strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
there are some
think-
challenges in that, like, lots of these things are actually very hard to identify. And so there are ways to, involve outside experts or experts from the campus community. I think Rebecca has her hand up. She maybe has some comments to build on what I was saying as well. We can't hear you.
No, we still don't hear. Maybe the mic doesn't work. Or
now, can you hear me?
Yes.
yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that this is, as someone who teaches in biology sometimes and in geography, and I teach biodiversity studies for our sustainability minor students, this is a piece that is a little bit lacking sometimes in the education that we offer our students. And that piece is a knowledge of biodiversity, where it used to be, when I was an undergraduate student, I had an entire course, an entire botany course where all we did was identify plants. And without those, and we don't do that, we don't do that as much anymore. So we have students, even in biology, even in ecology, who are finishing and really don't know very much about, they really can't identify actual non-human species that, in their surrounding environment, much less further away. And it's not because they're not interested, it's because we're giving them more of a theoretical, more of a research-based kind of education. So I see real interest among the students, and I see the resources that we have in terms of our outdoor space. And I think it's really, really important to value that outdoor space for its educational value on campus, in Montreal in general. But if we're not doing this, then we risk losing it without having, appreciated it properly, or recognized that we appreciate it properly before it's gone.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Jim, Grant, do you want to ask your question directly to Mohammed? Because I also like.
Sure, and there's been a nice discussion with Faisal as well. I was really impressed with his optimizing comfort in spaces at Concordia. And just as a prof, I've noticed SPS 110 at Loyola is a beautiful classroom, but then you see your students at the back all falling asleep. So I walk up there occasionally, it's really warm, and I'm sure the oxygen levels are low too. So I was wondering, and I remember Carly's PhD research where she outfitted herself with sensors. I wonder if, I asked, is it feasible to outfit volunteer students with sensors to get their impression about comfort in the various facilities at Concordia? And I think Mohammed and Faisal both had really cool answers to that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, James, for the idea. It's actually something that we've been considering. I think it is feasible. I'd say the more interesting part for me would not be, like, we can increase the sensoring within, like, we can just install standalone sensors, let's say, in different parts of the room, and just to get a better idea of how the the gradient of temperature differential within the room is happening. But what would be very interesting is that idea of getting users to provide their comfort feedback, at a long term and almost instantaneously, would be logging all the information. Like, we have a lot of information already, but we can add more sensors on the indoor conditions, let's say temperature, relative humidity, and so on. But how people react to those conditions as we go, I think, would be the key piece. So sort of a comfort app, like there is, Faisal actually mentioned that very interesting research that was done at NUS in Singapore, with developing an app for just, very simply, it was like almost smiley faces, almost like those those airports sort of, I don't know if you've seen those, like when you're going to the washroom, how satisfied you are with your comfort level on different items. So the idea is that it gets this, and it's very easy for someone to respond to. So it's not really a survey in a sense that you have to sit down and take 20 minutes of your time. It's just like, quickly, can you just rate on those smiley faces how good your comfort is? And I can see a lot of potential for that we can look at, and just the fact that it won't be a once like one in a spot or one-time survey sort of thing, which is what we used to do before, but more of a continuous data collection process on users' feedback. Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. I think it was one of the things that we wanted to do in the Living Lab, but I can see a lot of potential for moving this to other places, other classrooms. I think Alice also mentioned another classroom in EV that has similar issues. So we
yeah, the EV 6720 in the both tropical and freezing, all the climates in one classroom.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it might be just like an interesting project for one of the students, you know, to start focusing on a few classrooms and get that once we start reopening the campus. I can see this as a good, you know, concrete idea for work. And not that many people, in my knowledge, have had this continuous stream of feedback from occupants and measurements. Like we have a lot of measurements, like, you know, this is easy to find, but this continuous feedback idea I think would be interesting. So be happy to expand that.
Right, so yet another idea for Living Lab activities. I think we should now give the floor to Cassandra to talk about the Sustainability Action Plan, because we don't want to miss that.
Sure.
Sorry.
I think, yeah, Rebecca has her hand raised, but maybe you can go back to the
Sorry?
I think, Rebecca, you wanted to mention something?
I had kind of a general question. We can save till the end if that's more convenient.
No, go ahead. I mean, while Cassandra maybe starts screen sharing, you can ask another question.
Okay. So I know we're all super excited to get back to campus. I know I am. In the meantime, we're carrying out this huge experiment right now, running everything online. I just wonder, I feel like we should be studying this moment in time. And I'm just wondering if anybody is, if we know of anything that's being done, if there are certainly interesting questions to be asking right now. I don't know if anybody has any answers to that.
Well, I mentioned that briefly before. So we had did quite an extensive study on the impact of occupancy on the energy consumption of the campus. And as I said, it didn't go that much down. So it's a clear indication that there's potential for optimization, and we should really discuss why that is the case. And I think that corresponds very well to the sort of worldwide trend. We haven't seen carbon emissions going down as much as we all think. I mean, in the end, they've gone down, I think, 6 or 7%, because we just continue to operate lots of our equipment and buildings as if it was in full use. It's just not designed to be really user-centered and only operational when the users need it. So I think there's quite clearly a potential there that we should look at. And I mean, I think we can maybe combine these ideas of the comfort feedback and maybe also this energy detectives, as I call it, finding out where the waste is actually happening, and then maybe doing something about it. But anyway, so to see what is already in the planning to be done, we are very happy to have Cassandra here in the call, who did a lot of work on Concordia Sustainability Action Plan, not just the design of it, but also to make it work and implementing it. And well, Cassandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Is everybody seeing my full slide there? Great.
Yes.
And it works great. So thanks for inviting me as kind of a guest onto this panel. I'm already learning a lot. I will introduce the Sustainability Action Plan as a reference point for the Sustainability Living Lab that's under development right now. And ultimately, this new Sustainability Living Lab is an initiative at Concordia to foster community engagement in the Sustainability Action Plan. And so what is the Sustainability Action Plan? We launched this plan in November of 2020, so it's still quite new. And it's made up of 5 stream plans or sub-plans, which are the Sustainable Food Systems Plan, the Zero Waste Plan, the Climate Action Plan, Sustainability in Research, and Sustainability in Curriculum plans. And each of these plans outlines a long-term vision for 2040, so a 20-year vision for Concordia, something for us to strive towards as a community, and then more concretely outlines the 5-year goals, targets, and strategies that can, in the shorter term, help us orient ourselves and get on track towards meeting that long-term vision. And then, of course, a measurement plan was proposed to accompany each of the plans as well. And so, did the slide not switch for everyone just now?
No.
I'm having an issue with this for some reason. Now?
But now it's, yeah, yes.
Okay, great. So I think it's every time I touch the Zoom window, my PowerPoint becomes disconnected from the screen share. So I'll go over the vision really quickly for each of the stream plans, because it gives a good idea of the themes that are being addressed in each of those plans. And the Sustainable Food Systems Plan seeks to have Concordia become a leader in sustainable food sourcing. So like a recognized leader in sustainable food sourcing at Concordia, to be able to offer our community healthy and affordable food in every major campus building, and to enhance our capacity to grow, transform, and learn about food on campus. The Zero Waste Plan looks to have a 90% diversion rate of material waste away from landfill by the year 2040. So this 90% diversion rate is significant in that that is the threshold at which an institution can be a zero waste institution. But equally important, we want to also reduce the overall volume of our total material waste at Concordia. So the diversion seeks to make sure that our waste is going through our recycling, compost, and reuse streams. And then through reduction of total material waste, we can get that through things like procurement policies, and also sourcing more of our materials at Concordia from reuse initiatives. And the climate plan, although it does address some other things as well, primarily focuses, of course, on eliminating or reducing our greenhouse gas emissions at Concordia. So the primary vision is to completely eliminate all greenhouse gases from direct on-campus sources at Concordia. So this is speaking to those emissions that are completely within operational control at Concordia should be completely eliminated by the year 2040. So that would be things like our heating systems. And then accompanying that, we would seek to completely electrify all transport infrastructure at Concordia. So that would be our parking lots, if we still have parking in 2040, and our vehicle fleets and our shuttle bus as well. So that also speaks slightly to Chenyan's research that she was discussing earlier. And then after we've reduced our emissions as much as possible from these direct and indirect sources, to seek carbon neutrality. So this is a way for us to recognize that not everything will be in our control to eliminate. There will be things like our commuter habits, for instance, that will greatly depend on what the infrastructure of the city is and what the infrastructure is to get people to and from campus. And so those types of emissions we'll just seek to neutralize through verified local and certified carbon offsets. The research plan has kind of dual themes. One is for Concordia to become a recognized world leader in sustainability research with meaningful impacts on society. So this is recognizing that we have a huge potential at Concordia to perform interdisciplinary sustainability research, and then to link that research in with the communities and the initiatives and the programs that would have the most impact in solving our sustainability problems. And also the flip side of that is to become a recognized world leader in sustainable research practices. And this is recognizing that sustainability research, like all research, is actually very intensive. It's very energy intensive. There's a lot of waste involved, and there's a lot of travel involved. So all research at Concordia through this plan will be kind of targeted for this move towards a more ecologically friendly research practice. And finally, the curriculum plan seeks to foster an interdisciplinary understanding and practice of sustainability across the curriculum. So the key here is across the curriculum, the idea being that any student at Concordia, regardless of their field of study, should have access to and an understanding of sustainability learning. And so through that, we can prepare our students to link their training to broader social, environmental, and economic issues, so that when they graduate, they would be equipped to be change agents in sustainability. So those were the long-term visions, and then in the plan, we've outlined these shorter term goals and targets, and I won't go through them, but you can see that there are quite a few, and this is not the most comprehensive list either. I'm going to put a link in the chat to the Sustainability Action Plan for anyone who wants to take a look. But so we've got this long-term vision, and we also have outlined and articulated these 5-year goals for ourselves. And so what is the Sustainability Living Lab? This is something that we want to put into place at Concordia, recognizing that the only way we're going to meet these visions, these goals, these targets of ours is for the entire community to participate. And so we want to be able to link the Sustainability Action Plan with experiential learning opportunities for students. And a good example of that is the project that Carly kind of outlined. So we kind of let her know what the plan targets were, and she was able to integrate that into the requisites of the project. So the students came up with ideas that directly spoke to the Sustainability Action Plan. We also want to be able to form partnerships with researchers interested in using the campus as a testing ground for solutions to sustainability problems. And so another great example of that is what Mohammed was discussing in terms of indoor comfort and controls. And ultimately to enable our community members to propose and implement new projects that bring us closer to our goals. And Carly earlier in her presentation asked the question, how do we form the connections and how do we facilitate these types of projects? And so that's what this Living Lab is seeking to do. So there are 2 components right now, since it's a very new program, to this Living Lab. The Sustainability Living Lab funding program, which is in its pilot phase, and a consultation that I'll talk about in a moment. And the Sustainability Living Lab funding program is a new partnership between Concordia University and the Sustainability Action Fund. I think we even have a member of the Sustainability Action Fund here with us today, Sebastian Dupuy. So if there's any questions more about the program and how to apply for funding, we can definitely talk to that. But ultimately what this is it's a fund to support community-led innovation in support of the Sustainability Action Plan. And so any projects submitting to this fund would need to show that somehow they're working towards those goals and targets. And like was said earlier, it doesn't mean you need to succeed, but it means that we're going to be learning through that, and there's going to be some action, there's going to be some new ideas being formed around the plan somehow. We also want to encourage multi-stakeholder collaboration in recognizing that this is really the only way that we're going to make a lot of headway on the plan. So all teams submitting to the fund will need to have involvement of students and faculty, students and staff, some kind of mix to show that there's work there across those sectors. And the fund will also be providing sustainability related experiential learning opportunities to students. So any project will need to show that there are learning outcomes that are going to be achieved by students through the project. So you can see that these goals of the funding program reflect the broad goals of the Living Lab. But as I said, it's in a pilot phase. We're still learning. It's open for application right now. I'll put the link in the chat as well later. And we're still very much kind of receiving feedback on this and meeting new challenges and reorienting the program as we go. So it's a matching fund program, and it's being jointly evaluated. So all projects submitted are jointly evaluated by Concordia and the Sustainability Action Fund. And that whole program, as well as the Living Lab as a whole, is currently under development. So we're seeking input from our community so that we can understand the needs, the challenges, and the opportunities for collaborative sustainability projects at Concordia. And so we understand there's researchers there who'd like access to data from facilities or some kind of control over our temperatures, or it might be things, that people would like to do and they don't know how to get linked into that. Or there's students who'd like access to space, or there's staff members who are going to be in charge of implementing the plan who would love to get researchers on board and don't know how to do that. So what we want to know is what those challenges are, but also what the opportunities are, what initiatives can link to that already exist. So we'd love everyone to participate. The link will be in the chat after this, and we have a survey closing next week, after which we'll begin some targeted stakeholder sessions. And through this process, we hope to know what the gaps are, what those opportunities are, and ultimately how we can harness just the incredible pool of expertise and talent that we have at Concordia so that we can move towards our sustainability goals together. So I think I actually went over time there, and I'm gonna stop now. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to respond.
Great. I mean, thanks, Cassandra, for this. I mean, it looks like if we come up with interesting ideas now, there's a full mechanism in place to support this and apply for some Living Lab funding. So I think it's great timing that we have this discussion, I think, because it's all pretty new. I mean, the action plan is one thing, but then it needs to be filled with life, and we need involvement of many people. So I think we have a round of comments, ideas related to the Sustainability Action Plan and especially this Living Lab component, because I think it forms a great connection to our discussion. And I guess there's some people already pretty active in doing things at Concordia, for example, related to the waste management. I mean, that's quite an ambitious target of going to 90% landfill diversion. I mean, Montreal also has incredibly ambitious targets. I always wonder how we do it in more concretely. Maybe Faisal can give us a bit of a statement of what Concordia is already doing and how we think of really getting there. I mean, is it really realistic, and what kind of projects would we need to make it happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So I have a couple of slides just for some visualizations, but I won't load them up just yet. I'll just speak to your question, Ursula, because 90% sounds terrifyingly difficult to achieve from where we are right now. I think depending on what kind of scope you're talking about of waste diverted from the landfill, it could be like 40% for, I think, the city, 48% Concordia. So there's a long way to go. But the reason that's a goal in so many places, and not just Concordia, is that most of the materials we send to landfill are divertible. They are organics that could be composted. They are recyclable material. And we know there's issues with recycling, but technically things could be recycled. And it's paper and it's packaging mostly. So it's a feasible goal in theory. It's more of a question of actually accomplishing that. What are the infrastructures that we need, and what's the education and culture change that's required to reach that goal? So that's really what we focused on at Concordia, is having a plan with strategies that really systematically target shifting in that direction. So that's just generally what our zero waste program is. We really try to not only look at the 90% goal, but the 50% goal, which is even more difficult actually. So that one is more of an unknown. So 90% technically is feasible because we know the composition of landfill waste is 90% divertible materials, but reducing your waste by 50% is a deeper challenge that gets to questions of consumption and need and procurement processes, and it's complicated, but it's doable. It's an upstream challenge. It's a culture change challenge. It's looking at procurement patterns and identifying big win opportunities to stop materials from coming into the institution and redirecting people to reusing what we have. So like Alice was talking about, I mean, there is so much potential for circularity at an institution like Concordia because we have such a diversity of materials generated. And our Center for Creative Reuse has been such an interesting experiment for letting materials have a space to rest before they're thrown out and trying to make that connection. It's a really simple concept. It's also a community space that activates involvement. And that's the other big thing about waste management, is that there's so many intersection points with waste management in our lives on a daily basis. I mean, we consume and dispose of materials all the time. And so it's a very interactive challenge, right? Like there's a lot of points of connection, I think, as compared to, you know, let's say energy, where you might not feel like you have a lot of gains to make as an individual on the big system. We know that each of us like has a role to play that's maybe more outsized in material diversion. So that's kind of like a background of what we're trying to do. I'm personally interested in the question of how tracking better data on waste management and material consumption can help us get to more circularity. And so I'm just going to load up my screen quickly. Play from current slide. Oh, and then I need to go into share screen. Okay. Sorry, I'm always the slowest at loading this. Let's see if this will work. Do you see?
Yes.
You see the presentation mode, or do you see the?
We see the presentation mode.
Okay, great. Oh my God, it's a miracle. So I'm going to be really quick because I know we don't have too
You
much.
should, Faisal, we're seeing presenter mode, so you
Oh,
want to
you're
swap
seeing
the
presenter
displays.
mode.
Presenter, sorry.
Swap.
Perfect.
Done? Great,
Yep.
thank you. Okay. So, so what I'm looking at is data and digitization of waste management, which is a trend we're seeing. A lot of companies are starting to offer more sensor implementation in their services relating to waste management. But I think we can go back beyond that as a community and try to use these digital technologies to connect people more directly, rather than it being kind of like more of the same away kind of approach where you dispose of something and then somebody else takes care of the material. I want to see us connecting more. And I think we've done that a lot at Concordia, but we can do more of that. Yeah, we have a big gap in terms of reaching diversion goals. So Montreal is an 85% diversion goal. We're all super disconnected from our natural and technical cycles of materials. So when we consume items, we don't really think necessarily about where they're coming from or where they're going. Or we're starting to more, but maybe it's not enough. We have the recycling crisis, where there's so much contamination in this so-called recycling stream we're collecting, that it's not even something we can send away anymore effectively. So that's a huge sign that there's something wrong with what we're doing. And then fundamentally, like when we go to those points of connections, like the waste stations, those points of interaction, they're not interactive. We don't know what to put in each bin unless you've really dug into it, really asked the questions about particular items, where they're supposed to go. It's super confusing. There's a lot of packaging. We're only all starting to learn more and more about organics and how to compost properly. Throwing away larger materials is a problem too. The incentive is just really not there to make sure that low value items, things that you can't sell for a lot of money, are reused. So we usually put them on the curb or throw them in the bin if they fit there. Eco centers are kind of challenging to get to. They're far away. We tried to solve that problem with our Center for Creative Reuse, and it has helped a little bit, and we've seen a lot of success there, but there's still a lot of materials we're not tapping into. And then when we think of food, we don't know that much about food waste, the challenge there, how much we're throwing away. There's definitely attempts to quantify that. It's still cheaper to send food to the landfill than to compost it. That's a big problem. We're not addressing food insecurity. We all know that lots of people are not getting enough good food to eat, and we're throwing away a lot of it. And fundamentally, we don't have sustainable business models to solve these problems. A lot of these require subsidies, and they're very difficult to scale up. So there's a lot of research opportunities there, and we can use the campus as a living laboratory to try to learn more about these challenges, understand the barriers to participating in sustainable alternatives, measure more of in a detail level of our waste stream and more real time. So thinking of waste more like we think of energy, and actually taking a pulse on how much we're throwing away of what materials at all of these different intersection points could be really interesting. And we can use digital technologies to do that. We can integrate computer vision into waste bins to give real-time feedback to users on what they should throw in different bins. So we actually have a waste station that's in the EV lobby now, that we're partnering with the vendor for that to integrate cameras that will detect what people are throwing out and give them real-time feedback on that. And we can make that really playful and fun. And we can go beyond and actually try to measure like people's understanding too. So again, moving beyond just measuring the impact and like the outcomes to measuring what's going on to some degree inside people's heads, right? So how do you feel about the temperature in your room? Same thing, like what do you know about waste management? How do you feel about it? Why did you decide to sort items? Those are questions we can maybe engage with people on. My vision is that we're moving as a society into a new direction of what it means to manage waste, right? We talk about circularity right now, but even more than that, beyond that, I think there's a fundamental problem of information, data, and actually connecting people with opportunities by using better tracking of that data. So all of these different connection points of materials, we can activate information that's latent there by actually tracking tracking what people are disposing at waste bins, dumpsters. We can give people mobile apps that help them, try to figure out what to do when they throw things away at home. We can visualize this information back to people in web portals or on the app. We can gamify their involvement. We can know where our waste is going to if we track it. We can actually do that now. And there's great projects out of MIT that have tracked, waste going to Asia for the most part. So that's it in a nutshell. We're doing some active projects right now. Those are the waste bins I was telling you about that are in the EV lobby. We bought some microcomputers and cameras, and we're going to start playing around with that really soon. We're going to be developing a mobile app and hopefully trying to integrate it with the existing waste sorting app that Quebec offers, which is more like keyword based right now, but I think we could do a visual detection based version of that software. And we're also trying to see how we can increase food surplus diversion using crowdsourcing and technology to increase involvement in collecting more food from all of the restaurants and cafes on campus and around campus. There is so much food being thrown out that we can definitely divert. So those are just a few concrete projects. The Center for Creative Reuse, by the way, we can also do stuff with. We can track what's going in more than we are right now in more detail. And we can actually track involvement and figure out who's taking what. And if we can encourage people to we can recommend more materials to certain people who have certain consumption patterns. So just like we do with buying new, we can do that with the used material streams. So we have a call out right now for actually a diversity of roles that can get involved in this project, whether you're interested in mobile app development, computer vision, machine learning. If you want to look at automation of sorting, I mean, actually that's one of our goals in the sustainability plan is to have a sorting center on campus. That could be a really cool capstone project for mechanical or electrical engineers. We're looking obviously at data and how we visualize this stuff back to people. We're looking at user experience design, marketing and psychology questions come out into this when it comes to gamification and participation, project management, business students, and we need to look for some grants too. So if you want to get involved, please reach out to us. Here's our website, our Instagram and Facebook pages. Just look for Zero Waste Concordia. And I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, thanks, Faisal. Another bunch of some really concrete ideas of what we could be doing. Right, so we're coming close to the end. We still have 10 minutes left. So is there somebody from the audience who want to comment on this sustainability action plan or has maybe other ideas that haven't been mentioned? Because if not, I mean, there's a long question in the chat from Raman, which might be easier if you just pose it live rather than reading the question. If you're still in the call, Raman.
Yeah, I'm still in the call. I'm here. Yeah, no, I just see all of them are, I mean, most of the suggestions that are being made are top down. They're all basically, oh, we will do this at an institutional level, we will do this at this level, we'll do this at, like, what is it, what am I as a user? If I'm not in the university, what am I as a user supposed to do? I don't know. If I go with a battery or a phone to a shop today, I don't know where to dispose of it. If I go to I understand there is biodiversity by looking at the species, sure, but how do I improve it? What are the metrics available for me as a user to improve my building consumption and reduce my footprint? These sort of things are not to be taught at an institutional level, but at bottom, at a personal level. And I have if I was not working as an academic, I don't know what sustainability means. I don't know what circularity means. I don't know what these are all abstract terms which you might as well be saying something to me in a different language. It does not mean anything to me. These are, I mean, we need to be also we also need to have a face, I mean, something that is facing towards the broader community rather than saying, okay, we need to teach students. We need, of course, it is again, that's why I apologize at the beginning. It's a very abstract and general question, but it seems like everybody seems to be very focused on let's do this for our part, and then we can think about everything else. I mean, because policy making is not limited to us in the university, it's limited to the larger public, and that a lot of time we miss. That's what I felt, and that's why I wanted to know more about what that part is for Living Lab. Yeah, I see Alice is already raising her finger.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I think it's a fantastic question, actually, and perhaps I think it's also embedded in many research projects, and that this idea of like, okay, using the campus can easily tie to the broader community. If I can like surf on the material repurposing and material waste area. We're currently working with Infrastructure Canada and the Pont-Jacques-Cartier-Champlain Bridge to develop new sustainable solution for the dismantling of the bridge and reusing steel and concrete. So there's already kind of a mingling of students, researchers, architects, infrastructure stakeholders that work together with the Southwest community in Montreal. So I think in some areas it's already happening, and something that I found say fascinating, and maybe I would like surf on your question and bounce back this question to Faisal, is are you creating a connection, say, with Recy Québec and other stakeholders, like political stakeholders? Because I think like all the initiatives with the zero waste plan are so fascinating in terms of like seed project to be promoted within the community.
Yeah, we definitely connected with them a little bit on particular projects, but I think we could definitely go beyond. So I've reached out to them about the app, and they're really interested in partnership, but they want to see a proof of concept first, obviously, because it's a big challenge to be able to identify the diversity of materials we're talking about at the level of granularity that would be useful.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're interested in the circular economy. They have grants coming out. We should be working with government partners on this stuff.
So, but just to maybe end my comment and finish my comment about the inclusion of community, I think it will, I see the campus as a living lab first as a stepping stone, a case study, to then broader all those initiatives within the community and integrating the community also as the projects unfold, depending on needs and ideas. And something that I found really interesting in how people discuss their way of envisioning living labs is also the end goal being constantly modulated by community partners also. And so I know Carly wants to respond, so.
Yeah. I want to also make a small comment before Carly is on. I mean, I don't really see a contradiction. I mean, I think everything we mentioned on mapping our sustainability status. I mean, getting the data on energy, on biodiversity. I think is the precondition for all this metrics discussion. And then once we've mapped this, obviously we need to communicate it. I mean, as you said, I mean, not everybody understands all these specific details. I mean, and Rebecca even said that even biology students don't know their plants and species anymore. But so we need to communicate that. I think that's a whole second story. But I think the mapping exercise I don't really see as a purely top-down exercise at all. So it needs to build up. It needs to be broken down then again on individual level consumption patterns or sustainable behavior patterns. I mean, but that can be done once we have this have done this monitoring exercise. Okay, Carly.
Yeah, thank you. So that's a great question about how we. So I see two questions there. One is, how do we connect with the community as a campus, and how are we bringing people from the community in? And I think Alice has partly answered that already, that we do this through our individual research projects. We also do this through demonstrations. So for example, when we put in our pollinator garden, that will hopefully come with some kind of signage that says, here are the plants that we have here. These are things you can plant in your yards. Here's how you recognize them. And so using campus as an example of these are things anyone can do. But I think there's another way that campus can be really involved, and that's through pairing our students with community organizations directly. And so, for example, and maybe Rebecca can better speak to this, but our sustainability office has, or our sustainability minor has an internship option where students will go and work with community organizations. We have research projects where our students will go work with community organizations. So for example, one project in my lab right now, I have a wonderful undergraduate student who's working with a local NGO that wants to help people understand how to improve biodiversity on their own land. And she's, through a research project through the university, she's putting together a list of pollinator-friendly species for Montreal specifically that you can purchase locally and plant in your garden. And then that will be shared publicly as here is something concrete that you can do bottom up to make this change. And so by taking our students and saying, okay, get out into the world, go work with an organization to answer real questions that they have that come from the community, that's another way of envisioning this living lab, that it's not just on campus, it's bringing campus to the community.
Okay, great. Maybe Rebecca before we come to Chunyang.
Yeah, I mean, Carly kind of covered it, but I was just going to give some examples. Another example, one of the first living lab projects that has received, that is being considered for funding, is and okay, maybe I shouldn't say that it's been approved for funding because I don't think that it has yet, but it is a candidate for funding, is a community garden that is the Mind Mouth Heart project that's run out of the Loyola campus. And the goal of that project, it is a research project of a graduate student, Andrea Tremblay, here at Concordia, but the goal of that project is to outreach to the community and to help community members, particularly in an aging population, and also students, to learn about local food production, etc. So there is, I would say, not always by definition, but very often a big outreach component to a lot of these projects.
Thanks. I mean, that's great to know, and I think that fits very much into what we try to do in the Design, Arts, Culture, Community cluster of the Cities Institute. And I think the very strong connection between the sustainability and the Cities Institute, because if we work in the community on all different aspects of life, we could really make a super connection here and maybe do some of this understanding, communication, translation work that Raman was talking about. But before we conclude, Chunyang, you still have your hand raised.
Yes, I just had maybe one comment about this. Say, as a researcher, when we do advance the technology, it's difficult to put it in vision to the general public unless we build up these demonstration projects, right? Through this campus as a living lab. So this is a great program that we could make our research that can be visualized to the general public, and also it can also help us to attract even the industry and the city to use our advanced technology. So unless we do that, it's difficult to promote such technology, and also to come up with those the indicators that how we improve our communities that should be better. So when we electrify all our electric vehicles, or we can make our buildings sustainable, so we need to show it through data so that we can generate those kind of indicators that, okay, we really reduce those greenhouse gas emission by doing this, and lowering the cost of the vehicle driving. So we just by charging through the electricity. So those are numbers that we have to reduce through this living lab projects. That's what I think.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have two more final statements. Raman, maybe to react to all that's been said to your question.
I mean, I agree. The thing is, fundamentally, I agree with everything that has been said so far. The problem for me is this. We started with a fundamental assumption. We know the needs of the community and the people. And I don't think we do fully. And that's my problem with this approach. when we can't account for, so for example, I can give a clear example. This is not a good example, but it's an example that works. I am an Indian. I don't know many of the things that are being grown here. I have not been grown. I don't know what to do with a leek. I don't know what to do with certain vegetables. You can show me how to grow them, sure. What do I do with them? I don't do anything with them. I'll just keep it in my fridge until it goes bad, and then I'll go to my local store and buy the spices I know and make the curries I know. So, I mean, this is a fundamental issue that needs to be bridged. Same approach with transport. Yes, we need to have good transport. Yes, we need to reduce the emissions. Yes, I agree with all of that. But if I have to take a car, I would go for I would not go for an electric car, because I have to then fundamentally build an electric charging machine in my apartment. I have to build a lot of infrastructure that I have to pay for when my fundamental budget is a car and a petrol station or a gas station. That's not change for me. And these sort of limitations we cannot know. Also, we are looking at buildings. Most of the buildings of the campus are big commercial buildings, which have completely different requirements from a residential building. I mean, all of these things are not converging in the living lab situation, and that's my issue with this. It's not that we are not talking to community. It's not that we are not talking to institutions. We are doing all of those things, but I feel we are missing out on the end user itself quite a lot of times. That's my issue. That's
all right. Okay, thanks, Raman. I think that opens up a whole can of worms. So we need another sort of sustainability conference and the next workshop to discuss all this. Yeah, because we are already past our time. And Alice, do you have something urgent to say?
Well, no, but I mean, I would open up the can of worms a little bit more. So maybe I'll pass and I'll keep it for the next meeting.
All right, so thanks. So I would say we should summarize now. I think we had a really interesting 2 hours of very diverse discussion that features a bit the diversity of all the cities, people that are involved in cities and sustainability. So thank you all for participating. And I mean, what I sort of take home from this, I think we have this big action on mapping the status of our sustainability on the campus. So from all these different angles that we talked about today, and then come up with a master plan of where we want to go, because in the end we want to change things for a more sustainable future. And I think the second big topic revolves around the user. And I think we opened this very interesting discussion on how do we get better user interaction, user feedback on very different metrics, and not just comfort, but also maybe access to greenery, up to emotional states of the users. So there's it links to the mapping exercise, because in the end we don't want just to map greens and building energy consumption and all these sort of non-living aspects. We want to map how the user feels and the well-being of the user. So I think these two aspects are very closely linked and really interesting to explore in future for living lab projects. And with that, I think we should end this debate, and I give back to Jim for the final word.
Thank you. Thank you, Ursula, for organizing such an interesting, wide-ranging discussion. Thank you to all the panelists, Carly, Mohammed, Jing, Alice, Chunyun, Cassandra, and Faisal. It's been a great way to start up our final day. Maybe we'll pass quickly to Rebecca. Any announcements, Rebecca? You always have an announcement.
Yeah, I just want to plug a little bit the last 2 events of our week of discussion. So we do have an urban sprawl session, which starts at in about 45 minutes. And then this afternoon, you can come back for a fun Friday afternoon Jeopardy session on climate change. So hopefully you can join us then. You will find all the information on the website where you found information about this event. So do check on back. And also just a little bit of response to the last question, it's a bit of a cheat, but ForceSpace does run a ton of stuff on how to live more sustainably, post a lot of events, and ForceSpace is not the only one at Concordia. There are really regular right now online presentations and workshops by student groups and organizations at different departments and organizations and units at the university. So stay tuned. And with that, Anna, I will hand it back to you.
You've said it all. So I have no other words of wisdom except really to, I would say, encourage this type of discussion more and more via our channels. Thank you, Rebecca, for that shout out. We are more than open and happy to facilitate any kind of discussion such as this one today, and actively do so kind of on a weekly basis. So please check back in for space for these kinds of conversations. We'll keep creating them and inviting you to them. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.